How does a man go from working full time as an engineer to suddenly quitting his job and becoming a full time entrepreneur, to then becoming a reality TV personality, and then moving to four different cities in a span of 5 years? In this episode, I'm going to be sharing the crazy twists and turns that have led to where I am today. You don't want to miss this. Let's parlay. What's going on, family? Appreciate you tuning in for another episode. We are at 135, 136 subscribers now. I want to just say thank you for all of those who have decided to subscribe to the page and support the channel. If you haven't already and you want to be updated on when new episodes are coming out, please click the subscribe button. It is just the easiest way to know when the next episodes are rolling through. We are going with every week this year of 2026, we're going to be dropping an episode, and I've committed to that thus far, even in spite of moving from Austin to Houston, and I'm really dedicated to this. And for those people who are new, I wanted to record this episode specifically for you because you may not really know all of my backstory. You may not necessarily know some of the things that I've experienced in my past, what has led me to become the man that I am today. And even for those who do know me, maybe it'll be a just quick refresher on how Monty became who he is and how things transpired. So I'll be talking a lot about like where I was with my faith, some just major things that have happened in my life that changed my perspective. And I'm gonna try to fit it into a 30-minute episode, but there may be a part two for next week that just continues on with the story because I really want to just be as open and as transparent as possible about what's happening. I don't want to miss anything that's really important. So I'm going to go through and share just some some really crazy things now that I've taken some notes down and I've written uh, what those major twists and turns were. It's quite some perspective. So I'm going to share that with you today, and yeah, just buckle up and enjoy the ride because it's going to be a crazy one. All right, so let's first start off with the beginning. How did everything start? Right. So I was born in Queens, New York. For those who don't know, I grew up in Delaware for the majority of my life, and even that is a crazy story within itself. Okay, so I'm not going to try to spend too much time on this, but long story short, before I was born, my mother's mother, my grandmother, had passed away from breast cancer, right? And before she had passed away, she had told my mom, hey, I know you're in New York right now, but I just feel like you need to get out of there. And those were some of her last words to my mother, okay? After I was born, my mother was in New York for 5 years. So I was 5 years old before we moved. But my mom had worked in the World Trade Center. Okay, so she was on the 80th floor of the World Trade Center. And throughout most of that time of us being in New York, that's where she worked. And we moved essentially 8 months before 9/11 happened, which is a crazy story within itself. And that to me, I think was the real moment where I realized, like, okay, I'm really blessed to have had these circumstances play out the way that they did. Because if they didn't, I mean, I could have grown up without a mother. I could have been somewhere within the vicinity of 9/11 and been impacted by it. There's just so many what ifs that play out in my mind. And I realized that from a very early age, just because I was about 5 years old when that happened. And yeah, just realizing the impact of God's hand on my life. That was the first time that I kind of digested that. So, anyway, that was really like just a pivotal moment that I wanted to share with you all because I think it kind of gives a lot of people chills when I tell them that story. Um, yeah, just looking back on it. But anyway, so I grew up mainly with my mother in Delaware. My dad was in New York for the majority of my life with my little brother and my then stepmother. So I would transplant, no, I would go back and forth pretty often, especially in my earlier years. But from a faith perspective, both of my parents very much believed in God. We would pray before road trips. We would pray before we eat, all that sort of stuff. but didn't have too many conversations about maybe the Bible specifically, about Jesus. I never really like attended church much unless I went to church with like my grandmother down in Virginia, and that was its own, small experience. So that was my faith perspective. I didn't really have like any like strong roots or ties to the Bible, Jesus, or like a specific relationship with Christianity as a religion. So I then go, most of my life, high school happens, and I had plenty of stuff happen that changed my life there. I dislocated my shoulder. I had a heart procedure. I went from going to a public school system that was very diverse but very chaotic in Newark, Delaware, to then go into a very wealthy private school right down the street from Joe Biden. I mean, literally, his grandkids went there, and learned a lot through my experience there. And then went to college and decided to go to University of Delaware to study mechanical engineering. And my thought is I wanted to get paid after I go to college, and I wanted to have an abundance of opportunities for employment. And mechanical engineering seemed to be the best way to go through that. I loved math and physics. It seemed like an easy choice. So I went most of my college years being in a relationship, but again, still not really having any encounters with the Lord specifically. The most that I witnessed was a guy on campus who would always be yelling on a microphone talking about Jesus, and if you don't give your life to him, you're gonna go to hell. And that probably wasn't the best way of receiving it at the time. So again, it just felt like very distant and just kind of way off in the back of my mind. I was very much focused on graduating and just everything that was within the world of college. Fast forward to the end of my junior year, so that summer going into my senior year, I was working at an internship and I was getting gas at a Wawa gas station. For those of y'all who are in the Northeast and you know about Wawa, it's a staple. Okay, so especially late night, like hangover food, very very popular for that. But I was pumping gas, and this shorter Caucasian gentleman comes up to me and just starts a conversation. I can't remember exactly what he said, but he just starts a conversation with me out of nowhere. Super friendly. At this point in my life, I was pretty friendly as well too. Like my mom is a very sociable person. She's the type that be talking to strangers in the grocery store and stuff. So I kind of gotten used to and accustomed to that. And it's Delaware, very nice place to live. So we start chatting, and he mentioned something about like a business opportunity and if I was open to it. And at that moment in my life, I was like, sure, I'd love to learn more. And come to find out that he's a part of a multi-level network marketing group in business that he had been pursuing for years upon years with his wife. They sat me down and started talking to me about it. And if anybody has been exposed to network marketing or multi-level marketing, it's typically how it goes, right? You meet somebody just in normal places like a grocery store, gas station, whatever, and then from there, they make their pitch on what exactly their business opportunity is, and it's up to you to decide whether you want to join their team or not. At that time in my life, I had never really been exposed to entrepreneurship, so I said yes. I was like, absolutely, I would love to learn more, and I'd love to, just take on a side hustle outside of my 9 to 5. And they had spoken about things that I just had never been exposed to before, like the corporate cycle. And having had multiple internships, I kind of knew that, like, I don't know if I can really do this corporate thing forever. Something just seems to be missing. So that kind of fulfilled a gap in my life at that time. And I say all this to say that this was really my first encounter with Jesus, because the gentleman who brought me into that business opportunity was a devout follower of Christ and stood on business when it came to Jesus, him and his wife. And it was the first time I had really been exposed to people like that. And I'll be honest with you, when I met him and when I had conversations with him, it still felt like, well, that's just Josh. Josh is just Josh. Like there's things that we're talking about that make sense. and there's things that I'm learning about Christ in the Bible that I haven't learned about that also makes sense. But it still felt like there was this huge gap between where he was in his life, him being, I think, in his mid to late 30s at the time, me being 21 going on 22, and then also having grown up mostly in the world, mostly in the culture, and not necessarily being exposed to people like this before. So it just seemed like, I mean, him talking about abstaining before marriage and not listening to certain types of music, going to church every weekend. Like it just seems so far. But I was gravitating towards it because the more I learned about Jesus um, and really who he was, what his sacrifice actually meant, and the life that he lived while he was on this earth, I became a lot more attracted to that because I was like, I've just never heard this before. I just always thought of Jesus as this like soft, pillow like character who was, like there, there were stories about him in the Bible, but I didn't really know like the history behind it, like and all the confirmation about him actually being a person who lived. Um, yeah, it was just the first time that I'd really been exposed to that. So fast forward, I wind up going to a business conference with that team and with Josh and the rest of the members of the team as well too. And I had started bringing some people on as well. That's just how the network marketing business works. The more people you bring upon your team, the more product you're selling, the more money you're making. And I remember going to a business conference, and at these business conferences, they would have an optional like praise and worship part of the business conference because they were mostly like Christian led organizations. And yeah, it was probably like maybe the third or fourth business conference I had went to. This was back in 2018, 2019. And I remember being at the business conference and I had a team of maybe like 15 to 20 people at the moment. And I remember just sitting there and I don't know what it was. Something was heavy on my heart. Like, I don't know if I was stressing about business or if I was stressing about just where I was with life and whatever. And I was sitting next to Josh. Josh is, again, the small, I just want to give you the picture. Very, like maybe 5 foot, 660 pound, Caucasian gentleman versus me, 6'4", probably around like 220 pounds at the time. And I was sitting next to him. And I remember just having my head down and my eyes were closed and I was listening to, the praise and worship music. And I just remember feeling like this really large hand on my back during one of the songs. And the song that was playing at the time was Come to the Altar. And if you've not listened to that song, I highly recommend it. It's just, yeah, it definitely means a lot to me now, given what had happened that day. But I remember just feeling like a real large hand on my back, a real large and heavy hand on my back while that song was playing. And I remember opening up my eyes after some time and still hearing the song playing. And I looked and it was Josh. Josh, his hand is not that big. It's not that heavy. And I then remember like looking at him and feeling then his hand. And I was like, oh my, it was just like some sort of out of body experience. And at that moment, they were doing an altar call. And I remember just feeling like I need to go up there. Like I do believe in Jesus. I do believe that he is my Lord and Savior. And I want to proclaim that. And I remember making that walk up to the altar and just something in my spirit changing after that. Like knowing that I had this relationship with God now that I had publicly proclaimed. And maybe it wasn't public to an extent of like family and friends knowing and seeing it live, but to the people who were there at that conference and to my business team, like I was proclaiming that I wanted to live a different life. So I did it. And I don't really think I had any idea of what that actually meant as far as how I would walk that out. And that's where things got really challenging for me because I made this proclamation and I knew I wanted to live a holy life. But as far as what that would look like and the specifics of that, for me personally, it was still pretty distant, to be honest with you. It wasn't very clear, but I did it. And that was what I decided to pursue after that moment. So I remember after some time, it just became a lot harder for me to be content because there was a standard that I felt like I had to live up to, not only in my faith, but also in that business team and leading the people who I had brought on, where it felt like in my mind, I was convincing myself that I had to be perfect, that I had to just be on top of everything and I couldn't show any flaws. And for some reason, my natural response was to self sabotage, was to utilize some sort of outlet to express or to get away and to numb myself from the feeling of not being perfect and not living up to that standard. So I remember I would like go to womenizing, I would go to, drinking or whatever. And I just have some really like dark moments by myself where I felt like I couldn't really talk to anybody about it. And when I did, I didn't feel like I was really getting what I was hoping to receive from those conversations. And a part of that was probably me. I was young and didn't really know how to process the emotions and maybe to express what I was feeling. And I remember then going to therapy during that time. And thankfully, my job, had covered like, therapy sessions and stuff. And I went to 2 sessions with a therapist. And I remember breaking down like, man, like I feel like I have to be this, I have to be that. And the therapist said something that was kind of a double-edged sword, piece of advice or perspective, where he pretty much said like, Monty, you do understand that you are human, right? Like it's hard. You're never going to be perfect. You're never going to be this like ultimate example that never makes mistakes. And it was freeing. And it was exactly what I needed to hear. And I think that the Lord was speaking through him in that. But how I then interpreted that was, okay, got it. I'm not going to be perfect. And this business team and what's happening here is kind of making me feel like I need to. So I'm going to part ways with that. And I'm going to enjoy life now. I'm going to be more present. But what comes with being present is what I felt I was familiar with in the world, which is again like going out, drinking, womanizing, just focusing on things that were very much short-term pleasure seeking, right, and not long-term, purpose building. So I remember parting ways with the business team at the time, which was a huge decision for me back then, and then I went back to my corporate job, and I was working the corporate job the entire time. I was working the business on the side, but I went back to that corporate job, and I knew that that wasn't something that I wanted to do forever, like working full time as an engineer. But I didn't know exactly what the route was going to be to escape that or to pursue a business of my own someday. I knew I wanted to go into entrepreneurship, but exactly what that was, I had no idea. So in the transition of letting go of this business, going back to a corporate job, I then filled that business time with being out in the streets. You see, I went outside, I went and made sure that my weekends were full with going out with my boys and drinking and chasing after girls. I then, started doing that like after work and going to happy hours. I remember Wednesdays, I would make sure that I would get to work early so that I could get off early to beat traffic, to make it up to my boys' crib in Philly so that we could start pre-gaming and just hitting the streets for every Wednesday. Because that was a big thing in Philly at the time. It's called SIPs. And that was my getaway. That was my escape. So it was kind of allowing me to feel okay with the fact that, hey, I'm going to work this job that I don't like. It's paying me well, but I'm going to work this job that I don't like. And I know that I'm going to eventually need to leave this to do something, that's more aligned with my purpose. But in the meantime, I'm going to have my fun and I'm going to make this all about satisfying me right now. And I did that for some period of time. And eventually that ran its course. And I knew that I had to escape that cycle as well too. So I got into this like real conflicted period of whether I should continue working within that same role as an engineer, because I was working in the manufacturing side of things as a process engineer. So just like managing and engineering the systems that produce the material. And I said, well, you know what? I think I want to do something that's more aligned with my skill set and my desires to be closer to the end user. So I want to get more into sales. So I started applying for jobs outside of the company, maybe like more pharmaceutical sales. And then there was a role that opened up for a sales role within the company, and I applied to it. I interviewed, lo and behold, they wound up bringing me onto the sales team within the engineering firm that I was working for. And at that time, it seemed like the obvious move to make. I was like, I'm going to be able to meet customers. I'm going to be able to be a lot closer to the impact of the product as opposed to being layers behind it as an engineer. And I was like, yeah, this is the move that I'm going to be making that's going to make me a little bit more content with my work. And as that happened, I moved to Philly to be closer to the airport so I can travel to see my customers. But I also moved closer to Philly so that I can be closer to the streets as well too. So it could be a lot more convenient for me to be outside. And that was at the end of 2019. And at the beginning of 2020, that's when the pandemic rolled through. So then everything that I had hoped to do, traveling to see customers, et cetera, paused and stopped. And I couldn't do it anymore. And now I'm stuck in my apartment in Philly by myself with nothing to get involved in, as far as going outside and everything, and just pretty much, stuck. And that gave me a lot of time to reflect. It gave me a lot of time to, pay off some bills and some debt and all that. But I got to a point where I just had to really focus on like, all right, what am I going to do to make this time go by that's going to be productive? So I tried working out and running outdoors. That started impacting my knees, especially with the streets in Philly and the concrete is so unbalanced. It's terrible to run in the streets of Philly. Um, and then I tried, getting into trading. I was like, oh, well, maybe I'll learn how to trade. I'll use this as a skill that I can use to get out of the 9 to 5. Maybe I'll do this. And that eventually ran its course. Then I got into a relationship, which, like most people did during COVID, those COVID relationships were very much just like a codependency rooted endeavor because you just want someone to spend time with. And that's exactly what I did with my then girlfriend at the time. And that led me down a lot of different routes when it came to consuming THC, because that was just a very easy thing to do, given the fact that you don't have anywhere to go and you're just locked in at home. Like, THC will make you very fine with doing nothing. Okay, so that was a lot of that, and we kind of co-bonded over that as well. But that's when I started working out because the gyms opened up in Philly, and I was like, I've never tried actually lifting weights consistently. My dad had always wanted me to get into it, but I didn't really understand, like, all right, like, I don't know if this is going to help me achieve what I'm looking for or if this really matters. And from there, I went on a nice little dirty bulk. I gained, Lord knows how many pounds. I probably gained like 40 pounds, a lot of it being body fat. And I got disgusted with myself, and I was like, okay, yeah, lifting weights and eating a lot of food will change your body, but I don't like the way that I'm looking. So I decided to lock in on my nutrition a little bit more. And then I got a lot more confident in my body, and I was like, oh man, like, I really love working out. Like, I love the fact that I'm able to build strength. I'm able to like feel more confident, and people are noticing changes in me, and like they're impressed. So that started to feed my ego, and it gave me a lot more validation as well too. My girlfriend liked it, obviously. And I just started thinking, I was like, man, like, I really enjoy going to the gym. I've gotten into arguments with my girlfriend about going to the gym. And I started thinking, I was like, man, like, what if I just started teaching people how to do this on the side? Because I mean, the pandemic is still not really like opened things back up yet. So this was probably like 2021, and yeah, towards the end of 2021. And I decided, I was like, you know what? I'm going to start training people on the side and see how that feels. And from there, I was like, you know what? I like this. This is enjoyable. You know, this is fun. I get to meet the person who I'm impacting. It's a one-on-one experience. And I get to be social at the same time, ask some questions, have conversations about life. But I just, again, the idea of doing it through a gym and getting paid pennies on the dollar, it felt like, to be slaving away. I was like, I don't think this really makes sense. And at that point, I decided to make a crazy decision that I am going to give up my 9 to 5. I was like, I don't have any kids, no wife, no real serious obligations that are committing me to anything. I'm going to quit my job so I can do this full time. And I want to start a business that's somewhere. I didn't even know exactly what I wanted to do. I was just like, I want to go into business for myself, and I want it to be in the space of fitness where I can help people get in shape. And that's where I'm going to pause things for now, because we are coming up on a half an hour, and I realize that I'm probably about halfway through the story. And there's a lot that's happened since that point in my life, but we'll end it at this. I then quit my job at the beginning of 2022. January 10th was the date that I was officially done with working a corporate 9 to 5. And in the next episode, I'll share with you what happened after that, the crazy twists and turns in my faith, in my career, and in my life. Some of y'all know some of those details, and some of y'all don't. For those who don't, you're going to know next week. For those of you who do know, I'm going to share a lot more details that will let you know how impactful that part of my life was. So I appreciate y'all tuning in. Hope that you've enjoyed this episode of Let's Parlay. Stay tuned for the next episode next week, where I dive into more details about the rest of the story and how I've landed in Houston, of all places. Take care. God bless. See you later.